Okay. Hello to everybody that is tuned in, if that's the right expression. Although this says webinar, it's actually a pre-recorded webinar because, well, basically because it's a lot of people always ask for the recording anyway, and this way round, it's a lot easier for people just to digest the information at their leisure, comfort their own home, that kind of thing. Although Elaine, who works for us and runs the European Partnership, tells me she always listens to it and watches it on the treadmill. So this one's for you, Elaine. There's a lot of things going on. A lot of people who think Brexit's kind of done and they've survived. Well, the bad news is it isn't, particularly in terms of GB imports. So I want to go through the processes, homing in really on GB imports more than anything, because they're the things that are about to change. This is not a fluffy presentation. It's a kind of warts and all, and pretty gritty. So I would recommend that you share it as much as you can. It's important that the wider teams, both ours and yours, understand what the processes are and what that means, particularly in terms of importers' knowledge, in terms of GVMs, IPAFFs, so on and so forth. So we spent a lot of time writing these slides to make sure that we are covering all of the important aspects and that we've got them in the most up-to-date way as possible. So without further ado, as they say, let's crack on. The first thing to realise is that and I am talking GB imports in nearly all cases here, that 2021 was all about the trader, is get the trader ready, teach the trader how to do their own declarations, 2022 is all about the truck. You've got to remember that in 2021, with the exception of inventory link ports, there was no frontier as such. Therefore, kind of didn't matter too much where the declaration was. In 2022, there is a frontier. That declaration has got to be, excuse me, ahead of the truck. So we're going to go through that process and how to avoid the pitfalls there. So 2021 is all about the trader. 2022 is all about the truck. We kind of knew that. That's why the Customs Clearance Consortium is made up predominantly of logistics operators. We knew this day was coming. So hopefully we're a little bit ahead of the game. So first of all, let's remind ourselves what the current phased approach is. We've sort of, although this starts at October 21, it's a kind of a leading. So what we've had since day one, since January 2021, there's been full controls on any GB exports. So GB exports into the EU has had full export declarations, full health certs, full everything, as though Brexit has completely happened. And EU imports, excuse me, EU imports is the same. If you thought that was tough, then keep that in mind, because that's what GB imports are about to start looking like. Maybe not quite as bad, but nonetheless, they are significantly different from today. What we do know is that imports into GB has been relaxed so far this year, up until the end of December 2021. Imports has been pretty relaxed, even though it might not have felt like it sometimes. Trust me, compared to next year, and I don't want to sound like a doom-monger all the time, but compared to next year, it has been pretty relaxed. So you've got to get a lot tougher, a lot stricter on data, a lot stricter on timelines next year. So from January 2022, it's full import controls with what we're referring to as tighter rules of origin. In actual fact, as Sandra Strong of Strong and Herd, who has been very helpful for us in terms of understanding rules of origin, Sandra pointed out that it's been tough all year. It's just HMRC has taken, well, our kind of interpretation of it is HMRC have taken a rather pragmatic view of it. And whilst the conditions have not changed, 2021, there was a bit of a light touch on it, if you like. 2022, not so. So there was never an easement on rules of origin. It's just a pragmatic approach, perhaps. From January 2022, the process is what the process was, and the light touch is being removed. Okay. Of course, you've got a slight complication in amongst all of this, in that the deferred entry scheme, if you are using that scheme, and many are, and it's quite successful, or it's very, very successful, in fact. If you are using the deferred entry scheme for imports in 2021, you still have until the end of June 2022 to finish those off. So shipments that arrived in December 21, you've got until the end of June 22 to submit the declaration on that. So there's a kind of an overlap of process where you've got the easement from 2021 with the ongoing of 2022. I'm recording this from home, so if you might occasionally hear a doorbell go or a dog bark, but I have a team of willing helpers to try and fend people or head people off at the pass. So there will be a situation in, for example, January 22 or particularly February 22, let's say, where you're doing declarations, either supplementary declarations for goods that have cost in January 22, as well as deferred declarations for something that might have cost in November 21. So there's a bit of an overlap, but very manageable. It's just the kind of two processes on the go at the same time. Let's talk about SPS. SPS controls are relaxed currently, apart from certain plants, certain live animals, or live animals in general. From 2022, from January the 1st, 2022, crikey, I'm sick of saying it already. There is a requirement for IPAFFs on products of animal origin, composite goods, so on and so forth. However, there is no requirement as yet from January for an export health certificate. That's been phased in July, September and November, but we cover that in more depth at the moment. So from the 1st of January, there is a requirement for an IPAFFS declaration. It's not the hardest declaration in the world if the goods are of EU origin, but there is no requirement except for specific goods which are, as today, such as catch certificates and live animals and so on and so forth. There is no additional requirement for health certificates from January until at least July. And then that, as I say, is being phased in, but we cover that in more detail in a mo. Safety and security declarations, which seem to come and go and come and go. Well, the EXS has come, and that started in October. So the EXS Safety and Security Exit Declaration has kind of always been there. It's normally embedded in the EAD, the Export Declaration, but from October this year, there was also a requirement for an EXS when there isn't an export declaration. So a standalone EXS. That would typically be for empty pallets, empty containers, and so on and so forth. We've handled thousands upon thousands of those declarations. The easement ended in October, as I say, and nobody really noticed. So that's given HMRC quite a bit of confidence in that when you remove an easement, if you plan correctly for it, it's not the end of the world. It's just a change of process. So GB Safety and Security Declarations, what's lovingly known as the ENS, is still not required on the 1st of January and not required until at least the 1st of July. That date may move again, but right now it is the 1st of July. So let's have a quick look at what the present day looks like and why people have been somewhat suckered into thinking that everything's okay. So imagine you have a vehicle loaded in Europe. There's an export declaration prepared, and that needs to be lodged on SI Brexit, which is the I'm talking about Calais here, but the SI Brexit is the kind of logistics envelope system. In fact, it's known as the logistics envelope for you to lodge all of the declarations relevant to the vehicle. A little bit like GVMs is planning to be similar, but not quite the same, but similar. So once the export declaration is done, the MRN is lodged on SI Brexit, because there might be hundreds of them. And then when the driver, and SI Brexit gives the gives the user a reference number in return, so that when the vehicle arrives in Calais, for example, the driver only has to quote the SI Brexit number, and in that envelope are all of the export declarations pertaining to that truck. So that's what happens today. Everyone's very familiar with that. At the same time, the trader, depending on the Incoterms, but the trader or the logistics provider is supplying declaration data for the GB import. The market, much to our surprise, and certainly to HMRC's surprise, has landed on FFDs, full frontier declarations, from day one, really, and not really taken much not really sort of availed themselves of the easements which are there. That's fine, but I think that's kind of setting yourself up for a bit of a tough task coming. So right now, the import declaration is shared with the agent by somebody, depending on who's responsible for that, and the agent sets about, or the trader themselves sets about completing a full frontier declaration. The vehicle is then allowed to ship from EU to UK, or GB, which is probably more precise because of the situation in Northern Ireland. However, there is no frontier. So when you do that frontier declaration, it's kind of not connected to the truck. And once you do a frontier declaration, you must arrive it, tell chief that the goods are in the UK by midnight of the second day. But in all essence, in a lot of cases, nobody knows where the goods are, or certainly where the truck is. So the goods are unloaded, the declaration is done. For those agents and traders and logistics operators that I've known long enough that, for them to tell me the truth. Many of them are telling me that they do a full frontier declaration kind of sometime that week, because nobody quite knows where the lorry is. The lorry doesn't get delayed if there is or isn't a frontier declaration, because there is no frontier. So it just kind of gets done, but it's not much different from a voluntary declaration just being submitted to HMRC. That has been the reason for that is because goods have arrived, but it's not actually connected to the port or the truck, or particularly the location of the goods. So today it looks like it's full frontier declarations. We're doing everything in the normal way, but in actual fact, it's just an entry being done in the background because an entry needs to be done. But it's not much different from a deferred entry, only it's done quicker than the 6-month maximum you can take on a deferred. It's the same thing really, but it's been dressed up as a full frontier deck. Now let's put a frontier in there, which is the GVMs. So previously, if I just jump back there a minute, there was no frontier. So there's free flow at the GB frontier. Excuse me. Now let's stick GVMs in there and see what effect that has. Now suddenly that full frontier declaration does need to know where the truck is. The declaration's got to be done before the truck arrives in Calais. And the MRN number or numbers, because again, there could be hundreds, must be lodged on GVMs in order to get a GMR, a goods movement reference. Goods movement reference or record, I can never remember, but either way. So they must get a GMR in order to be allowed to board the ferry or the train for the UK. So without SI Brexit, you're not getting in the port. Without GMR, you're not leaving the port. Okay, because you can't set off until your path is clear. So suddenly this full frontier declaration, which was kind of done within loosely connected to the movement of the truck, is now absolutely rigidly connected to the movement of the truck. The entry is, as I say, the entry is done, it's connected to GVMs, and that is the departure notice, if you like. Once GVMS sets sail, i.e. the all of the GMRs are recorded on a vessel. The vessel leaves the port. That then arrives all of the entries that were attached to that GMR. Excuse me. That can also risk all the entries are risks at that point, not can, but they are risks at that point. So if there's any insufficient funds, if there's a documentation check, so on and so forth, that's going to take place at this stage, whilst the vehicle is crossing the channel, or the North Sea, or blah, 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 depending on which ports are using GVMS. And I am homing in on GVMS here rather than inventory linking, because inventory linking is a tried and tested model. It's been in the market for years. People know and understand that. And generally speaking, there is more of a movement towards GVMS, even from inventory link ports, particularly for driver accompanied vehicles that don't particularly need port inventories to make things happen, because there's a driver at the front of the vehicle. And if you tell him to go to shed 3, he will go to shed 3. If it's an unaccompanied container, in order to go to shed 3, somebody needs to take it to shed 3. So that's why inventories exist in ports, particularly. Not just that, but lots of other reasons of the movement from quayside to gate. So anyway, so there must be an MRN on the GVMS. The GVMS must be lodged, or the driver must have that in his possession before he's allowed to leave Calais. This graphic's not particularly right. It just makes more sense if I do it like that. But you can't actually set off for GB unless you've got a GMR. And then as the vessel leaves, the GMR arrives, all the entries sitting underneath it. And then you can go off and deliver the goods. This is stressy. This is suddenly, I mean, it creates a bit of an issue actually, in that anybody who is complaining about GVMS, saying, oh, how are we going to cope with this new system? If they were doing full frontier decks or simplified frontier decks or any other process at the frontier, as they should be doing today, then GVMS is actually not a problem. It's just somewhere to lodge the information. However, the sort of noise from the industry is that we're not ready for GVMS, which means we've not been doing the right thing for whole of 2021. That's what it suggests to me in any case. So suddenly now the frontier is absolutely critical. There is a process to negotiate at the frontier, and it's about to become stressed if you're constantly working with full frontier declarations. If, for example, you miss a full frontier declaration and the vehicle crosses and then you realize that there was another consignment on there, so on and so forth, you can't arrive it anymore because the GVMS process will arrive the entry. So you can only really do a voluntary declaration to say, look, I messed up. These goods were also on that truck. I'd now like to lodge an arrived voluntary declaration, which is actually saying to HMRC that I messed up. You know, in the current system without GVMS, you can kind of fix the mess up without anybody knowing you messed up. With GVMS in place, the entry will not be arrived other than via the GVMS process. So if you miss it off the GVMS, it will never arrive. And therefore you've got to force the arrival and thereby basically alert HMRC that you got it wrong. Okay, so worth thinking about. So lots of stress on the frontier if you do the full frontier deck process particularly, but there are other ways around it. The way we've worked from day one, and you can honestly count the full frontier decks we've done pretty much on two hands, we tended to keep away from them as much as possible because there kind of wasn't any need for them. It's a lot easier for us to do a next day sub deck rather than a frontier deck. They are essentially the same thing, but we were sort of prepping for 2022 rather than surviving 2021. You know? So we are fully approved with the IDR and CFSP approvals and a whole world of acronyms, which I'm sorry I'm going to keep throwing at you. So the way we do it is when the frontier comes in and GVMS is in place, bearing in mind we're very familiar with GVMS because we've been working that process on GBNI Northern Ireland movements from day one. So GVMS has been part of our working life the whole of this year. Similarly, PBNs into Ireland, SI Brexit into mainland Europe, and so on and so forth. So GVMS to anybody who's in those sort of multi-channel routes is not a major shock. It's just same, you know, more of the same, really. So what we do is we still use still use simplifications, not frontier declarations. So we use entry and declarants records if the goods are standard goods and don't require a simplified frontier declaration because they are products of animal origin and so on and so forth. So as much as possible, we use the simplifications. We're not against doing FFDs, but we can do SFDs, FFDs, every other acronym you can think of. But our job is to make sure that that vehicle crosses the frontier with the least potential for problems. And in most cases, that is a simplification, something like CFSP, which wasn't cobbled together for Brexit, a little bit like TSP was, for example. CFSP has been in existence since 1998. Okay, so it works. We use it. So we just do a simplified declaration to get the vehicle through and a sort of a create an obligation to finish the job off by doing a final declaration. That allows the vehicle to load because the GVMS accepts EIDR. Sorry about all the acronyms. The vehicle then can go off and deliver as normal. The goods in receipt allows us to do the final declaration, which must be done, unlike deferred entry, the final declaration must be done by the 4th working day of the next month. So from our side, we're not particularly worried about January, but we're very worried about the 4th of February. So at the moment, somebody can cross the frontier and we'll do the declaration later. The way GVMS is set up, we can't allow anybody to use our EIDR approval unless we've got the record that will allow us to do the declaration by the 4th working day. We cannot have a situation where the truck crosses on our approval, but the data is not forthcoming. That's risking our approval and also leaving us liable for duty payments. So we will always require the level of data that would be required for a full frontier declaration if our approval is being used, and then we will decide how best to get that through the frontier with the client's approval, obviously. And if it's a full frontier declaration, then so be it. And if there is an easier way with less risk, then we'll use that and do the supplementary declaration the next working day. So in most cases, the IDR, which is just an EORI number on GVMS, so that's pretty good. Apart from SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary goods, they require an SFD, no choice. It has to be an SFD because they're controlled goods. Even without the export health certificate, there is an IPAFFS still, even without the border control posts, which don't start until July, probably. They are still classed as controlled goods, and we must operate in a BAU, a business as usual environment, even though business is not quite as usual. It will be at some stage, so we need to start now. So we have to do a simplified frontier declaration. Even on simplifications, we have to do a frontier declaration, although an easier one or a simplified one, for goods of animal origin, or anything having an IPAFFS declaration, or controlled goods, or anything with a catch certificate, or live animals, so on and so forth. So it's the type of products you would imagine to have controls are the ones that require a little bit more than an E or E number at the frontier. Which leads me neatly to IPAFFS. So as I say, IPAFFS doesn't start until July, September, November, depending. So what we're just going to go through now. Well, first of all, let's do the phasing. So from the 1st of July, correct myself. IPAFFS starts on the 1st of January for everything. It's the accompanying export health certificate, which is phased. So from the 1st of July, you will require an export health certificate for high-risk ABP, animal byproducts, all regulated plants and plant products, such as those with plant passport and so on and so forth, all meats and meat products. Excuse me while I have a quick sip of my coffee because my throat's dry. All meats and meat products, and HRFNAO, because we do love an acronym, which is high-risk foods not of animal origin. 1st of September, you don't need a health certificate until the 1st of September for dairy products. We'd like to think we had some influence on that, because at a recent select committee meeting, we were pointing out that a full load of Baby Bell is a full load of Baby Bell. Why do you need a health certificate on everything? Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, there's a postponement to the requirement for dairy products. Look, it probably had nothing to do with us, but as far as my family and friends know, that was completely down to me. Share the word. 1st of November, everything else really. So all other regulated products of animal origin, including composite and fish products. The one that we often come across is catch certificates for fish, only required for marine fish, not farmed, and it is required for a flappy fish. It isn't necessarily required for salmon ravioli, because one, it might be farmed, and secondly, it's composite. And the one in the middle, which catches a lot of people out, is a tin of tuna. Let's be really clear, a tin of tuna requires a catch certificate. So if you've got a vehicle winging its way towards Calais, it's required it all year, by the way. So if you have anything such as it doesn't have to just be a tin of tuna, but it gives you that kind of idea that if it's a fish in a can, it's a fish. Okay, therefore it needs a catch certificate, even though it's a tin of tuna, and it would be an odd day fishing if you threw your line in and pulled out a tin of tuna. Nonetheless, there's a fish in the can. So let's do the full process first on IPAFFS, so that we know what's the worst situation. So the full process on IPAFFS has the following steps. There must be a trader. Sorry, the trader is responsible for the import standards. The trader is responsible. So don't go importing the goods if you know that they're not acceptable to the UK market. This was really our point in the select committee meeting, where we were saying, why do I need an export health certificate? Surely the burden of proof is on the importer, not the exporter. And what we should be able to do is do a pre-alert on IPAFFS, which actually says these goods are coming, and it's risk profiled off the back of the IPAFFS. So if there's a situation where the authorities would like more details, then let's get an export health certificate for that product. But let's not do a catch-all for 100%. Excuse the pun on the catch. Let's not do a catch-all for 100% when only 10% require further evidence. So, but right now, that's how it stands. So the trader is responsible, no matter what happens. It's the trader being the importer in this case, is responsible for the standards of import. Every IPAFFS declaration has what's known as a PRFTL, another acronym, party responsible for the load. We're registered on IPAFFS. If you're not registered on IPAFFS, and you are involved in SPS goods, then recommend you get registered. That's done through the UK Government Gateway. We're already registered. We've done about 500 IPAFFS declarations, a lot of them in test and trial. But the reason for a PRFTL is that if the authorities need to contact somebody, they will contact the party responsible for the load. Equally, if there are any charges, and we don't know what the situation is with that yet, but if there are any charges, then the IPAFFS becomes like a purchase order. So any of those charges will go to the party responsible for the load. Same with traces and CHED, by the way, which has a responsible for load category. So very similar thing. Okay, so we've got the trader is responsible. We've got somebody who's able to do the IPAFs and have an account at all the relevant places. What happens now in terms of the practical steps on the ground is the exporter arranges the export health certificate. That is inspected by the official vet. It's sealed at pallet level if need be, if there are multiple pickups or groupage. And the seal number is applied to the export health certificate. The pallet level seals are still in some form of negotiation, but they've some trials have gone pretty well. Others I've heard the seals just breaking too easily. But the idea is that you can seal at pallet level because the authorities recognise that there are milk round collections on wheels as part loads or groupage, and therefore and bear in mind the export health certificate has to be issued at source, although you could do it from hub if you are if you're actually storing groupage goods, getting all the data in and then issuing the health certs from there. The pallet level seal is really for collection on wheels. Anyway, the haulier applies a commercial seal at final pickup if you are pallet sealing, or if it's a full load or one collection, one delivery, or one collection, multiple deliveries even, then the official vet will apply the seal rather than pallet level sealing is now going to seal the truck. So pretty straightforward stuff. An export declaration is created. The IPAFFS declaration is created technically 24 hours before the arrival of the vehicle in the UK. However, that's down to 4. So providing the IPAFFS is in place at least 4 hours before the vehicle arrives in the UK or the consignment arrives in the UK, then that's acceptable in nearly all cases. There is an SFD on import as a minimum, either a full frontier declaration or a simplified frontier declaration. The GB authority will check the paperwork and decide whether or not they require a physical examination of the goods. If they do, the vehicle will go to a BCP for that to happen, and the goods are delivered. So this is very, very, very similar to the export health certificate traces CHED process today, in that although I'm not actually aware of pallet level sealing on traces, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Actually, I'm just not aware of it at all. That's got me thinking. But certainly there's an export health certificate, there is a seal, there is a declaration as in traces, and there is a process that's driven off the back of that, which may or may not result in a physical examination of the goods or a seal check of the vehicle and so on and so forth. So that is the worst case scenario of full fat IPAFs. So what's been phased in? Well, the requirement for export health certificate, as we've pointed out, is not required until July, September or November, depending on the product. And therefore the checking of the paperwork or the accompanying paperwork and any physical checks equally won't happen until July, September or November, depending on the product. That means the situation's a bit happier. However, as with most things where there is an easement, it's a bit like whack-a-mole, these processes. Whenever they're being designed, you hit one, another one appears. So within this easement where we're saying, okay, there is no requirement for an export health certificate, it creates a bit of a data capture issue, in that we were certainly planning to pull some of the data elements off a scan of the export health certificate, because the type of data elements that are additionally required on IPAFs are not generally something that the transport company will have in his possession, or indeed be on the accompanying paperwork. So without an export health certificate, there are a few challenges in terms of what data we need. As always, you turn one off, another creates another problem. So what data does an IPAFs need over and above the normal customs data that we've all become used to this year? Well, it's this. And there aren't too many. In fact, there are only really 5. The 6 and 7 are just about certification. So we need to know the class of the product. Is it farmed? Is it domestic? Is it wild? What class of the product is it? We need the species. Now, this is where I don't know whether you did Latin at school, but I remember doing Latin and thinking, when will I ever use this? I should have studied harder at Latin, because most of this process and most of the tariff, whenever it gets complicated, goes into Latin. So we need to know the species now, such as Bos taurus, Ovis aries, Ovis aries, however you say it. Again, I didn't do Latin. That's not quite as complicated as it sounds. Bos taurus is cattle, Ovis aries is sheep, but there are many, many, many variations of that. So we have some issues with that kind of data capture. We're working on it, but if we are asked to do an IPAFS declaration, Don't be surprised if we're coming back saying I need class, species, so on and so forth. Commodity type is also required, whether it is colostrum, composite, UHT. We need to know what type of commodity. They're the hard ones. Those three are the difficult ones. So what's the class? So is it farm, domestic, or wild? Not so hard, that one. Is it species? Reasonably challenging, but not terrible. In that, it's clearly, if it's goat's cheese, it came from a goat, and if it's dairy, it came from a cow, let's say. So we know that it's a cattle species. The commodity type is more of a challenge because we are not food scientists. So right now I'm looking at colostrum, and I don't actually know what colostrum is, but I know what composite is, and I know what UHT is. So it's that kind of level of detail that's going to cause some challenges. Reason for movement is important. Is it internal market? And by that meaning the goods are coming to the UK to be sold. Is it coming in for research? Why is it coming in? We need that sort of information as well. And the place of delivery, which is not always the importer, as we know. So at the moment, the delivery address of goods is not so important. It's just the importer, and what happens after the frontier and after the import declaration. Whatever happens. It's already cleared, But in IPAFFS land, we need to know the place of destination. We need, and then there's the two in italics where we need the certificate numbers. So not yet, but eventually we'll need the health certificate number. We do need from day one the catch certificate number, and we need that in addition to the IPAFFS number, because the import declaration requires an IPAFFS code, UNN number or CHED number, and also the catch certificate number has to be entered. So I need both, or we need both for that. And the seal number would be very useful and not desperately important, because it doesn't at the moment, because there's no BCP. But ideally we would have pulled the seal number from the export health certificate, but of course there isn't one, at least until July. So the seal number is another piece of data that we could do with. So IPAFFS data over and above what would normally be shared as customs data is that section there, which is 5 to 7 key points. Keep them in mind and work out how you're going to share that information with your agent. When I say over and above, let's just be really clear of what over and above what. So I'm going to flash through these rather than go through granular detail of these. But what this shows is if we're doing a simplified frontier declaration, what data fields we require as either standard, i.e. there isn't a Y in the controlled only section. And if there is some form of control, such as an IPAFFS declaration, we also need the sections with a Y in them, which we've also shown in blue. We've got at the bottom repeat for each different commodity code is literally that bottom section of SFD 10 to SFD 18 will just keep revolving by the number of commodity codes that you have. But that's the same as today, so there's no great shakes. So right now, the simplified frontier declaration requires either the black text for standard goods, the black and blue text for controlled goods. And then the final declaration requires the rest. But there's not a massive amount of difference in terms of an SFD for controlled goods between the SFD and the final deck. So there will be times when we'll recommend doing full frontier declarations just to close it off, because you can see there that there's a lot of the blue that's required on the final declaration was already required on the SFD for controlled goods. For standard goods, not so. It's a lot easier to use entering declarants records, providing we have a record, and therefore we can then just finish the declaration the next day without stressing the frontier. We are CFSP approved with full EIDR, with aggregation, which we can discuss with you as well. Okay, you're doing well, you're hanging in. Just the detail on the GVMs. There's a lot of slides here, but there's the idea of recording it like this is you can rewind, do whatever you like to zoom in on it. So let's just talk a little bit about what we do, and then we're going to talk about GVMs. So what's our approach? It's always been a bit different, only because we've got years of experience, and I remember loving customs clearance when I was a teenager and then hating it in equal measure because it was repetitive and boring. So we've tried to take a lot of that out of it, because that's how errors get made. So what do we do differently? One is because I'm a Dover lad, and when we set it up, 24-hour operation is completely normal to me. It's quite unusual in the customs clearance market. There are agents who are 24 hours, but we started day one 24 hours a day. So we are fully open 24 hours a day apart from Christmas Day. We've got 130 trained staff. That's grown significantly this year. I mean, I think about a year or so ago, there was about 6 of us, and now there's 146 of us. That doesn't mean 16 aren't trained. It just means they're on different aspects of the business, such as finance and admin. So there's more than 130 people on shifts. Now, of course, that sounds like quite a big number, but when you've got 24-hour shifts, you're actually open, almost 4 times more than, for every shift team you need 4 shift teams. So we always do a 4 on 4 off of 2 nights, 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off. So that requires 4 teams, hence the staff number is quite high. We have real-time SLA tracking, because if we can't provide a service level, what's the point? Now, that was in January. Let me take a gulp of my tea a minute, just a second. In January 21, that was horrendous. We were actually considering sending out a letter saying our SLA is 72 hours. It was that bad. And but once I had a look at it, I said we might as well send an SLA saying we're shut, or a communication saying we're closed. So we've worked really hard on that, and our published SLA is now 2 hours. So in most cases, we can turn documentation around within 2 hours. We don't on subdecks because there's no panic. So that's 5 days. But generally speaking, on live ops, it's a 2-hour turnaround. We set the SLAs by client and by routing. So certain routes will have different SLAs on them, particularly if we're waiting for inventories to appear before we can finish the job off. And all of this is controlled by our ticketing system, and any breaches are reported back and visible on a huge screen in the ops office. We also have concentrated a lot on robotics because, as I was saying, it's a very repetitive job. Lifting a gross weight off there and putting it on there, and a net weight off there and putting it on there, and That's how things go wrong. Excuse me. So what we've done in a lot of cases, even when we say 75% automated, doesn't mean there's 25% of jobs that aren't automated at all. In most cases, it means that there are some jobs where only 75% of the job is automated. So we pull in all of the data from the client, we populate the entry, and then the technical guys go in and finish the entry off with the PNR codes. They verify the country of origin, so on and so forth. The accuracy is very high because of that. Fast turnaround, and as I say, very, very accurate. And in fact, the robot's stupid, but he's beautifully stupid in a lot of cases, because, and there are many of them, by the way. If the data comes in, it doesn't go for a fag break, it doesn't go on holiday, it hasn't fallen out with his girlfriend or boyfriend. It just does what it says in front of it. And if the data is correct, the entry populates correctly. So and then it leaves us with the more technical job and the more customs agency job of actually just finishing off the Y codes and the preference codes and so on and so forth. So concentrating on what needs doing rather than wasting our time either 1, hunting for data, or 2, copy typing into our software. We also have an approvals and a rules of origin team, which are going to become more and more valuable this year. I mean, we always knew they would be, but as 2020, when I say this year, I'm already in 2022. In most cases, our approvals, and I'm talking about AEO, CFSP, duty deferment, bonded warehouse. In a lot of cases, we handle those free of charge, i.e. we're giving away consultancy, which can be sort of £10,000–12,000 per application in some cases. But we do that on the basis that we want to do the declarations. So we ask people to sign a contract to say that they will appoint us as their declaration partner, and if they do, we'll do all the approvals that make that possible, free of charge. If not, it's just a pay-as-you-go approvals process, which is the normal kind of day rate process. So we do both, but as much as possible, we want to actually plug you into the approvals and then use those for you on a day-to-day basis. We also have a network of agents across Europe, which is partly what the Customs Clearance Consortium is all about. I said I would always mention Lucas in Lankowski at these things, so I always do, and I've got a surprise for him later on. But we work with some fabulous agents across Europe, and we spend a long time finding them, because we wanted to find people who shared our vision of modernising what needed modernising. So that's worked very well, and we're very proud of the network we have. We also have a network in the UK of ETSFs, external temporary storage facilities, nowadays just known as TSFs. These are inland ports. This is where you can close a transit, where you can make a transit to that location so that the vehicle passes the frontier as a single unit on a transit, and then it's broken down again at the ETSF and dealt with on a consignment level. So if there's one particular consignment that's causing you problems, the rest of the vehicle isn't delayed whilst that consignment is handled separately. We've got ETSFs in Kent, near Ashford, Heathrow and Leicester, and we're working on one in Ireland at the moment. So very, very useful. We've hardly used them this year, but we knew we were loading the bases that they would be useful for next year. So suddenly you've got groupage loads coming into GB, multiple MRNs for SI Brexit, multiple MRNs for GVMs, or a single transit. And you just go from hub to hub. The option's there, so keep talking to us about these things. And we've then in the process at the moment of launching Truck Stuck. This is a process we did for the launch of Trader Support Service, which we're the partner with Fujitsu and others, including the Institute of Export and so on and so forth, and HMRC, obviously. And one of the things we did, amongst others, for the design of the TSS process, is we operated the Truck Stuck hotline. So that if somebody arrived in Cairn Ryan and didn't have a GVMS or didn't have a TSS deck, we unstuck it, basically. Now that went really well. We focused a lot on that because we were very conscious that Sky News, for example, would rock up in Cairn Ryan and film lines of trucks and say, told you this wouldn't work. And in fact, we only found out the other day that they did rock up in Cairn Ryan, but got pretty much no footage because things were flowing pretty smoothly from day one. So we're doing the same for the GB frontier. So the truckstuck.uk is now live. We are 24 hours a day anyway. We know our stuff. So if somebody is stuck in Calais, we ask them to send us as much information as we can, and we'll do our damnedest to unstick them. Worst comes to the worst, and we can't. At least we can then say to the driver, it won't be until 9 o'clock in the morning. So not because we can't be bothered, it's just we just can't get there till 9 o'clock in the morning. You can't get to the data rather till 9 o'clock in the morning. In which case that allows the driver to book off and at least start the next day with a clean card and a clean set of hours on working time directive. So even in a negative, it can become a positive in better to know than to spend all night trying to sort things out whilst eating into working time directive time. So keep an eye on Truck Stuck. I've got a feeling it might get quite busy, certainly initially. Well, we've always concentrated on data. Data is absolutely key to us, and there's been a lot of processes this year of sort of PDFs of invoices and but yeah, we're in a data world now where you order things online, you do this, you do that. I have a printer in my office at home, but I don't even know where the cable is. I've got a ream of paper that has lasted me about a year. So, we don't print things, we don't do this, we don't scan it, we don't even really scan stuff much nowadays. We just take source data all the time. So we do handle PDFs, but it's a case of saying like there is always a better way. So how can we find the data and how can we get that data to a better position? So we've concentrated a lot on what we lovingly call the RPA, which is our robotic process automation. So we do quality code validation, we check EORI numbers, we check routes and processes and match them, because that was a big challenge in the early stages when agents were sitting there saying, well, look, the vehicle's going from Peterborough to Dublin via Belfast. What do I do? What processes do I need? I know how to do the processes, but I don't know how to string them together. And that's been our strength really from day one, is that we do know how to sequence these events in the right order in order to keep things moving. Didn't look like that in January, but it does now. We've also got return goods relief triggers in there. So if we spot that something could maybe qualify for return goods relief, then that's what we use. You may be able to hear a barking dog in the background. And we're also updating tariffs, and we'll come to that in a little bit more. We've also got SPS controls in there, and we can handle most formats, XML, EDI, even Excel, CSV. The team will work with you to make sure that data is smooth. As I say, we can handle PDF. We talk about that a little bit further on. And we've done most of that with a very glorified Excel at the moment, but in the background we've been developing our portal, and at the moment we're live testing that. We got the whole thing down to about 2 screens really, which is just kind of header, vehicle information and then load information. It's pretty slick. We're testing it internally at the moment, as we are kind of mimicking the client, and it also allows people to cut and paste jobs in, and also to cut and paste an RPA in if they become used to that. But of course, it gives you much more interactive information. So as the entry's been processed, we're telling you it's been processed. And then, of course, the future. We've got to keep thinking about future proofing all the time. So we're already in testing for CDS. We're already using CDS in Northern Ireland, have done since 1st of January. And we're already using CDS in the Republic of Ireland, which is AIS, but very, very, very similar. Right now, the CDS has been going for, I don't know, 5 years, maybe more than that. And there's been some reluctance to change, but there are some significant operators already on CDS, including us. And at the moment, more than 50% of the throughput on CDS is by EORI or by the EORI group. So quite proud of that fact, because we're not resistant to change at all. We want to embrace it and ideally roll out CDS without our clients even realizing that they're on CDS, which of course is due to finish in 2022. So we're quite ahead of the game on that one. We have a very scalable operation because we have robotics, we have large shift teams, and we also have offshore data processing, so that if we get data in a sort of a dirty format, if you like, a format that it doesn't allow us to immediately process it, we separate that from the customs knowledge, because it doesn't take 2 years to read an invoice. It doesn't take 2 years customs knowledge to be able to look at an invoice to find an Incoterm. It needs somebody who can look at an invoice and find an Incoterm. They don't necessarily need to know all the rules of origin and so on and so forth. So a lot of cases, PDF is not using the resource correctly. So we separate the data from the task, from the deck, and the data is handled by the out from the offshore company. Sorry, I couldn't remember the word. From the offshore company, and then fed into the ops as normal. And we've got a significant investment in future customs programs, and of course we're very proud to be a partner with Fujitsu in the trader support service, which has becoming the model of how to do certain things. You might not always agree with that, but believe me, when you consider how fast that was launched and how smoothly things have operated at frontier level, yeah, it's got heads turning a little bit. We're also super connected, as you would imagine. So in Ireland, we connected AIS, AEP, DAFM, ISIS, ICS, quite connected, PBN systems, and so on and so forth. In Europe, the same, mainland Europe, and we always refer to Ireland and mainland Europe as kind of two different things. And that's, I'm not trying to set up another Brexit or an Ireland exit, but it's a case of the processes are different, because if you're going to Ireland, your chances are you won't have a transit. You're going to one member state, and there are no more member states if you keep going. In mainland Europe, of course, you've got you might enter one member state and you're traveling to potentially 26 more. Excuse me. So super connected as well in Europe, and super connected in GB with GVMs, transit, ICS, I'll actually say it right this time, IPAFFS, exports, inventory linking. We've got badges at all the significant ports and airports, as you would expect. And then we've got simplifications, EIDR, STP, and FFD. Oh, sorry, there's no simplification on FFD. So we've got simplified declaration procedure, and also entry and declarants records approval. And of course, we can still do frontier decks. Plus, we're working very hard at the moment on integration, real-time integration with TMS and WMS systems, so that there is a smoother flow. We want a customs declaration to be not a step-in process, but rather the result of the previous steps. Okay, so watch this space for that one. Something we're lovingly calling IMS, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. We do all of that in a backwards and forwards motion, so it's important that the data is coming in and going out, and so on and so forth. Excuse me. Why do I get a cough in the middle of these things? And we do all of that 24 hours a day. So let's have a bit of a look at what's changing. First of all, let's have a bit of a look at some of the misinformation that's out in the marketplace, and there always is, and this is no exception. So what have we heard recently? And as George Bernard Shaw said, not that I knew him personally, although I sometimes feel that old, beware of false knowledge. There's a lot of it about. There's a lot of new customs agents that maybe don't know what they don't know so far, and we learn every day. So there's no reason why. It's just we probably had a larger base because we've been in that business for so long. So what are we hearing in the market? The one shocking one I heard the other day is EIDR, entry in declarants record, ceases to exist on the 31st of December. No, that's wrong. The deferred entry scheme ceases to exist on the 31st of December, although you have until the end of June to complete the declarations. But EIDR is still valid. It's part of the CFSP platform, now known as the Customs, I can't remember, SCDP or SDCP. But anyway, we all still know it and love it as CFSP. That was, as I said before, that was created in 1998. EIDR is an extension of that. It's been around for years. It's staying. It does not finish, and it is not the same as the deferred entry scheme. And I'll cover that in a bit more detail in a moment. You need a GMR number in order to arrive in GB, and you put that GMR number on your import entry. No, you don't. You put the import entry on the GVMs system to get a GMR. The other process, the person who said that you put the GMR on the entries thinking inventory linked. That's how UCNs work on inventory linking. GVMS doesn't work like that. You actually do the entries. It works like SI Brexit and the logistics envelope. You do the declarations and you create a record and attach them to it. So the entries are done in a sort of non-inventory way, and then GVMS creates the connection between the vehicle, the frontier, the ship, and the entries. Or the trains, excuse my former Eurotunnel colleagues. You need an entry. You must have a frontier declaration. Yes, you do, but that can be your EORI number if you have EIDR approval and the goods are standard goods. So a declaration doesn't have to be a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be a full deck. So what does that look like? And I appreciate this is quite small, but this is a video, and you can play this a million times until you can read it. So let's have a quick look at swim lane process of shipper, customs agent, customs and DEFRA, carrier, and the ferry company stroke Eurotunnel. So the shipper will create a shipment, confirm details to the carrier and the export agent. For example, this is a load from EU. The export agent will create an EAD that will be processed through customs, and the carrier will then receive the MRN from the export agent. So that's been going on all the time since 1st of January. The carrier will then enter the MRN number on the exit port system, SI Brexit, for example, and get a reference number, which is the kind of check-in reference that will contain all of those MRNs. At the same time, and I'm using us obviously as an example here, at the same time that the export information was shared, the import information is shared with us, for example, and including IPAFFS data. Oh, sorry, I'm focusing on IPAFFS first. So IPAFFS data is shared with us because we've got a pressure of the 4-hour window here. So we then enter that in IPAFFS. Some clients, and hats off to them for doing this because I think it's super organized. There isn't a requirement for an export health certificate from day one on most products, but this particular client is raising the export health certificate from day one and sharing that with us so that we are all ready for July. The only difference is when July comes is that we need a vet. So all of the paperwork process is already in place. It's really worth looking at because it's super organized. So a dummy export health certificate is being done, sent to us, the IPAF is done, and the CHED number is created all easily within the 4-hour window. At the same time, we're creating a frontier declaration, be that SFD, FFD, or merely an EIDR declaration against our approved EORI number, and that's accepted by customs. That then creates create a GMR number, and we share that with the haulier. So the carrier will then receive the GMR number and pass it to the driver or the port system. Eurotunnel Smart Border, for example, means that the driver doesn't need any barcodes or numbers. You just put it on the front on the Smart Border and give him that reference number. Now, the way this works is the ferry company will check it. So you enter the port, basically. You enter the port with the SI Brexit number. I'm using Calais as an example here. So you're allowed into Calais because you've got an SI Brexit number, and you're allowed on the boat because you've got a GMR. Pretty much simple as that. But what's happening behind the scenes is that when you go into Calais with your SI Brexit number with all your export MRNs underneath, they are arriving those EADs and therefore and arriving or departing, depending on how you look at it, and are telling the system that those goods have now left the EU and the export is complete. The export declaration from Germany doesn't go any further than Calais. Yeah, I remember somebody asking me once, what do I do with the declaration when I arrive in Calais and I'm waiting for the boat? I said, just throw it in the sea. It's no good to anybody. The export's finished. You don't require the export declaration to enter GB unless it's transit, of course, but that's not an export declaration. So the SI Brexit system will tell the European system that all those exports have now left and the VAT records are complete. And it will also GVMs will also arrive the UK declaration, whether that's an FFD, an SFD, or an entry in declarant's records that's now saying those goods are now past the point of no return. The IDR is the most free flow of all of this because it's the most trusted trader ish. Okay, SFDs next, FFDs not so, but they're not terrible. But there is more chance of a physical or documentary inspection with an SFD or an FFD. So wherever possible, we tend to use the one with the least border friction. So EIDR, for example. The goods then arrive in GB, and there's a goods in receipt. That confirmation is given to us, and we wrap up the job with a supplementary declaration, which, as I can say, it doesn't have to be 175 days. You know, everyone was worried about the deferred entry scheme. I don't want to leave it 6 months, but it was up to 6 months. There's a number of declarations we do today where the vehicle will pass the frontier tonight and the subdeck will be done tomorrow, but without stressing the frontier. So, you know, why stress the frontier if you don't need to? So let's kind of get the vehicle through, wrap the job up. If that, and I always also hear this thing about why do 2 entries when you can do 1. We'll cover that in a moment. So, you know, we always use the we recommend the process with the least amount of friction at the frontier. So let's have a look at GVMs, because as I say, we've been using this from day one. It's not, we're not particularly worried about it, but I suppose it's easy if you know how. So let's go through the process, particularly for non-GB registered traders. This might be really useful. So I'm going to walk you through a GVMs. So first of all, you need access to GVMs. And in order to gain access to GVMs, you need a government gateway account and you need a GB EORI number. You don't necessarily need a company, like we can normally create a GB EORI number within about an hour, but it's a GB0 number, not VAT registered and so on and so forth. But we can do it. So if you need a GB EORI, talk to us and we can arrange those for non-VAT registered. If you want VAT registration, 6 to 8 weeks. But a GB0 one without VAT registration, and you don't need VAT registration for GVMs, then we can do that pretty quickly. Where is the crossing going from and to? So your options are from a European port to the UK, basically, from Great Britain to the EU, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So clearly in this case for GB imports, I'm going to look at from the EU, let's say Calais to Dover. The GMR is issued at the front end. So the GMR is now created. Now what you've got to do is populate it. And there is only 1 GMR per vehicle. If you end up with multiple GMRs per vehicle, only one of them will check in. And all of the entries attached to the ones that won't check in will never progress to an arrived state, unless you speak to customs and say somebody did something wrong. Now we have to populate it, so we have to get more granular with the details. But the nice thing about GVMs is it gives you a number at the front end, and then you populate and you give it all the details. As far as I remember, with PBN it's the other way around, and with SI Brexit it's the other way around, where you populate and get a number. Anyway, you can go in and edit and everything, but whatever. So now we've got to get into more granular information. So what is the planned route of the crossing? For this example, Calais Dover. Who's the carrier? Because the carrier is involved in the process. The check-in system is also talking to GVMs. So this isn't a showstopper if you get it wrong, by virtue of the fact that there is a box said unknown, and clearly Irish Ferries Calais service started after unknown because they've done it in that weird order, HMRC, not us. So you have to select the carrier, but I think it's more advisory than compulsory. You have to complete it, but I don't think it's a showstopper if you chose DFDS and shipped with P&O, for example. Will the driver be travelling with the goods, travelling with the vehicle? Yes for driver accompanied, no for unaccompanied. That it's important that they know which state that's in, so that they know how to handle the declarations in the back end. So it's like a memorandum, it's like a pseudo inventory. What's the vehicle number of the truck? Because in this case we said it's accompanied. And And is the vehicle carrying any goods? Well, there's a bit of a get out of jail here, isn't there? You could put no, the vehicle's empty. And we saw this a lot with PBNs into Ireland. It causes all manner of problems because the entries now don't arrive. There's a truck sitting in Dublin with an empty PBN. There's a whole load of entries sticking on a PBN that the truck didn't use to check in with. It caused a lot of problems on Ireland. I can tell you that for nothing. When you look at EU to GB, if you're going to tick empty, just ask yourselves, how many trucks do you think ship empty to GB? I mean, it would be a rarity. And if you want to be examined, I'd put empty, because I'd certainly pull you over if I was still running the Dover terminal and have a look at why are you coming in here with a truck? Bear in mind, you're not even registered in the UK, because 85% of them aren't. Just be careful what you put. Right, then you have to put the declaration details. So you add the declaration info, such as the FFD or SFD. There's also birds there, but this is for bulk, low value. We're not really homing in on that, so we'll home in on full frontier declaration or simplified frontier declaration, and this is where that information is going to go. Your IPAFS number, if applicable, will be stated on the FFD stroke SFD, and this is how GVMS knows that there is a BCP requirement, because you'll put in a frontier declaration information on the GVMS, which is linked to an IPAFS declaration, and then when that's checked in, GVMS is saying, oh, hang on a minute, there's a BCP requirement here. They need to go to a border control post, not until next year when they're even open. And also this hookup isn't valid on day one. And the vehicle will then be directed to, right, you need to go to Sevington to see the vet to have these goods inspected. PBN works in a similar way in Ireland. But there is no situation where you put the IPAFS number on GVMS. It's the entry, it's the hip bone is connected to the thigh bone stuff. So if it's on the entry, it's the entries on GVMS, that's the link. Okay, so you have to put the customs declaration one by one for each of the consignments on the truck. There is an API. Or use EIDR. Again, at consignment level, if that's the way you're doing it, unless you're a super agent, in which case you just put yours and break it down afterwards, however you want to manage that. But EIDR is an option on GVMS. It works just fine. Under EIDR conditions, the approved EORI number is the frontier declaration, and that will be validated, although not initially, behind the scenes. So you put in the EORI number, it will check whether it's a valid EORI number and an authorized EORI number. Now we're fine to use our EORI number providing we have a record. You must create a record in your own system, or the agent must have a record in his system before releasing his EORI number for EIDR. You're done. That's your GVMS done. There's your number, there's your barcode, although as we were saying before, you don't particularly need the barcode if you're going through Eurotunnel. Not quite sure about Calais, but certainly with Eurotunnel, it just goes on the smart border piece. Let's just dispel the myth that the IPAFS number goes on the GMR. It doesn't. The entries go on the GMR, and the entries have attachments to them which are accessible via a GVMS system. It's not that difficult. There are 10 steps there. I mean, it's easy when you know how, I suppose, but I think this guide should be quite useful. Now let's look at the pitfall. So no GMR, no go. Okay, used to be a thing years ago with ferries, with sealing, no voucher, no credit. No GMR, no go. So let's do what we're used to first. There's a truck heading towards Calais. There's a French flag there because you're heading towards Calais. And we have the MRN numbers of each of the export decks. Lovely, everything's in order. That's how the year's been going. All of those are loaded on SI Brexit, and the vehicle's good to go. Not a problem. That's initial teething problems, but otherwise that's how it works. Let's have a look at UK. Slurping a coffee, sorry. Man's got to drink coffee. Let's have a look at the GMR for the UK. We have a pre-lodged full frontier declaration, which will be arrived by the GVMS departing. That one, good. We have a client who's on EIDR, and he's got an approved EORI number. Looking good so far. And then we've got a client who does his own thing, or has his own agent. If you're a logistics operator, and the client says, no, I've got my own agent. Well, imagine every box in that truck had its own agent. Suddenly, you've got a real nightmare trying to get the GVMS, trying to complete the GVMS record, because you need the entry number or the EORI number for EIDR. That's it. There's no options. And if somebody's self-service or using another agent, what happens if they're closed? Who are you going to ring? So there's a real challenge for a groupage or a part load operator heading towards Calais with 20 consignments on it, and everybody's doing their own thing. Remember how I started this? 2021 was about the trader who was almost encouraged to do his own thing. 2022 is about the truck. And this is where we always knew it was going to go. And we've got a couple of clients at the moment, and we're very proud and grateful of this, where they've actually logistics operators who have said they won't carry the goods unless we're clearing them. That nobody's trying to exploit the commercial opportunity here. But if that red one is self-serve and is closed, there is no GMR. The vehicle will sit in Calais until that red one is not red anymore, is either blue or green. So it's not a logistics operator being difficult. The message really is we'll only carry it if we clear it, basically, because otherwise full loads are different, because full loads is, there's only one number to get and it can't be that difficult. But anything other than a full load, and it becomes a real challenge. And just, if your logistics operator is being a bit demanding on this front, go with it. He's got your interests at heart. He just doesn't want that vehicle stuck in Calais whilst the red one waits for somebody to open. Just saying. Also, don't forget, in July, the ENS is going to be required, and the logistics operator, who is actually the haulier, is responsible for the import safety and security declaration. He needs data too. So he's going to need some data. So even if somebody is fully self-service, we do all of our own paperwork and all of our own declarations, we don't need an agent. Where's the haulier supposed to get the information for the ENS from? So it's not live yet, but it is coming, and rather like the client, the super organized client with the dummy export health certificates, don't wait for the day. Start the process, how it's going to continue. And then the date just becomes the date rather than, oh my God, another change, So GVMS in action. Let's look at why we do certain things certain ways. So the full frontier declaration, which, as I say, loads of people this year saying, well, can you do them? Yeah, of course we can. We just prefer not to, because it's stressing the frontier when you don't need to. Also, if you say that a full frontier declaration requires 100% of data, just as a start point, and it also has risks in that it might go route 1 or route 2. There could be an E9 insufficient funds on the deferment account when the entry has arrived, because a pre-lodged entry is not accessing the deferment account. It's only when it arrives with GVMS leaving the port that the deferment account will tell you whether or not there's enough money in it. There's challenges with proof of origin and the preferential duty rate, and you don't have enough time to think if you're always worried about this truck with wheels heading towards Calais. So full frontier deck requires, let's say, 100% of data as a start point. SFD is about 75% of that in terms of what data is required in order to get the vehicle across the frontier. SFD for standard goods is about a third of the effort of a full frontier deck at frontier level. And EIDR is about 10%. We've got to create a record, create a GVMS, and so on and so forth. And bear in mind that EIDR is a declaration. It's just not done yet. So the EIDR is a frontier declaration which is accepted and you're allowed to pass through. Just it's an undertaking to do the declaration later from a trusted trader, whether that's the importer or an agent. So full frontier, this you can see now why we start at the 10%, why we start at EIDR and we work up to, so full frontier deck is not our default. It's a situation where if we have to do it, we will do it. But it's the one with the most risk, the most resource issue. Bearing in mind, when full frontier decks are now absolutely connected to the frontier crossing, that will result in a reduction in capacity of the customs intermediary market, simply because it's not a flat line of process anymore. There's now peaks and troughs in vehicles are heading towards Calais, vehicles, and Saturday night when there's nothing going on. But your frontier decks have got to be done for the vehicle. So suddenly you're going to find that the workflow is more spiky. And if it's spiky, that's going to reduce the capacity because you're going to have dormant times and equally times when the capacity is particularly aligned. You've got too many people on nights and it's gone nuts on days, let's say. So let's deal with some other things that we hear about. We hear this one a lot from lots of different agents, to be fair, is why do 2 entries when you could do 1? Let's just do the full frontier declaration, pack it, wrap it, and get it all done in one go. Why are you complicating the process? I've never agreed with this, and I'll tell you why. Let's have a look at, let's do 10 into 1 does go. So let's do a Frontier deck at 35 quid, just as an example. Let's do 10 of them. So now we've spent £350 on 10 supplementary declarations for 10 trucks, all wrapped up, all packed, lovely. And bearing in mind this year, there's no risk anyway. You were basically doing a sub deck. Now let's do our way of 10 simplified Frontier declarations, either EIDR or an SFD. And with 10 of those, we spent £150. So we've got £350 versus £150. But we haven't finished the import in the black column, in the SFD column. We still have to do the supplementary declaration. Only that can be consolidated. So all 10 of those loads can be on one subdeck, costing £35. Overall saving, 47%. So whenever somebody says to me, why do 2 entries instead of 1? There you go. Because I can potentially save you 47% stroke 50% of your documentation cost and make my life easier and make your life easier. That's why we do it that way. That's why we home in on simplifications. Rant over, if that was a mild rant. Let's deal with some FAQs, and then I'm going to get into some pretty granular stuff. But we're nearly there. You're hanging on well. Can you do FFDs? We get asked this quite a bit. Yeah, of course we can. We just don't recommend them as the first choice. So we would much rather do a simplified Frontier and a next day subdeck. You don't have to take 6 months. The only thing we have at the moment is we've got to have data. Okay. Do you only look after EU RoRo? Look, nope. It's the bit that we concentrated on because it was the bit that was broken. I've been in customs clearance most of my working life. I've got good friends in customs clearance, and I didn't really want to open an agency and just go toe to toe with them in the market of nicking customs clearance work from each other. Why do that when there are 200 million declarations popping out of the air for Brexit? So we concentrated on that. So our lead business is always EU RoRo, but if the client also has rest of world, air or maritime, fine, we can do that. We have the badges, we have the skills. We're not big on air, I have to say, because we don't get a lot of requests for that. But if there's something else you require, bonding warehousing, entry into bond, ETSFs, we have the whole gambit. It's just our opening salvo, if you like, is EU RoRo. Can you accept PDF of the invoice packing list and the AD, etc.? The old way. Like, can you accept a fax? Basically, is what people are saying nowadays. Yeah, we can. We prefer not to. This year, we've tried to concentrate on data. But I was asked a while ago who we consider to be our biggest competitor, and actually, I think it's us. The reason why I say it's us is we've been holding back. So we've had a lot of people contacting us saying, we'd love to work with you, but we can't give the data in your format. We said, well, look, okay, then this year we can't work with you because that's not how we want to work. If we open up to what we're lovingly referring to as the dirty data, PDFs, invoices, faxes, really, it's a modern day fax, then yeah, we can do it. So we've created this offshore dirty data team that will also work closely with OCR scanning, optical character reading, and also with our robotics teams to actually handle the process quicker, because it is still repetitive, even though it's a PDF. But as I say, we detach the data from the deck so that we're not using up top quality customs agents reading declarations. As it happens, our offshore, I keep wanting to say an outsourced offshore team actually can also do customs declarations and have been doing subdecks for us this year. So we started with that, and now we're going to turn them into data so that they know what they're looking for. Okay, so the answer is yes, we can, and the portal is all part of that. So that the offshore team populate our portal. They actually do the piece that the client's unable to do for the client, so that we see data exactly as we would have done had the client done what we wanted them to do, basically. Sounds like the client's all wrong here, but it's not. We're just being realistic. Is the Customs Clearance Consortium taking on new members? We've not pushed it this year, but yes, we are. We didn't really need to this year because it was all about the trader. But 2022 is all about the truck, and the CCC model is perfectly suited to logistics providers. The ... means I'm going to give you a little bit more information on that in a moment, but don't worry, we're nearly done. Is there anything else I need to worry about? Here's the bit where we were nearly done and now we're not. Yes, unfortunately, there are a few things you need to worry about, and I'm going to unload them now. The first one is the difference between EID. You just need to understand this. The difference between EIDR and deferred entry. They are very different and often confused. Currently, under deferred entry schemes, there is a record keeper, let's say the importer, and there is an approved party, the green one in this one being the EIDR or CFSP approved person. So right now, the record keeper and the approved person can be two different organizations stroke people. Got it? That's how deferred works. And after deferred, when deferred stops, what we now have is if you want to use EIDR or CFSP in any of its formats, the record keeper needs to be EIDR approved. So the keeper of the records needs their own, in their own right, EIDR approval, which, as I said, we can handle the applications free of charge in exchange for handling the data elements. And we also handle the FSDs, the final declarations at month end. So if when deferred's finished, the record keeper, the trader, let's say, must now have EIDR approval, or the EIDR person, i.e. EORI, must have a record. Okay, so previously record was over here, CFSP approval was over here. Now they must be together, which means either the record keeper needs CFSP approval or the CFSP approved person needs a record. So we can't just let you cross through the frontier in the hope you're going to give us more data later. We've got to have the data up front. Get that right, it's all going to go pretty well, because it's not so different from what we're doing today. I mean, really not so different. The only thing we've got to turn, and we've been working with clients all year to say, we've got to turn that data faster data. Now we need truck level data. But again, it's what we've done on Ireland from day one, which in January and February was possibly the worst thing we ever did because it was horrendously busy. But a year down the line, it was the best thing we ever did because, to coin a phrase we use, we know what bad looks like and we're not going there again. So we know how it can get messed up quickly by data flows not being right, and we're not going to have that happening again. The other one I wanted to cover, which we covered many times in the past, but it seems to be popping up again, and it's a worry because it's not been obvious this year, but it's massively obvious when you put GVMs in place, is imagine you are a smoked cheese producer in Germany and you supply UK retail. Happens a lot, that's absolutely fine. That's what goes on. The Lidls and Aldis of this world brought supply chains with them and have very good European products. Not to say that Sainsbury's and Tesco's, everybody doesn't, but hey ho. Now with the frontier in there, suddenly now there's an export declaration. So the German smoked cheese producer is now, since the 1st of January, has been doing an export declaration. And when you ask them who is the importer, scarily, quite a few times they'll say, well, the retailer. Obviously, I bring in the goods, I take them to UK retail. I don't know why I did an accent. I make the goods in Germany. I do an export to leave Germany, and the goods are coming into UK retail. And that obviously the retailer, Tesco, Aldi, Sainsbury's, is the importer. Actually, that's not what happens in a lot of cases. What actually happens is the German smoked cheese producer produces cheese as a listing with a UK retailer on a day 1 for day 2/3 order profile. So what he does is he moves stock to the UK as forecasted stock movements ready for orders. So those movements cross the frontier and go into storage, Oakland, for example, or Kalina or Peter Green or whoever really, but these third-party storage providers. Sounds like I'm really undervaluing their role, but the logistics providers. And then when the retailer orders it, it's delivered from store. So it's actually a domestic supply. So at the time it crossed the frontier, the retailer hadn't ordered it and might not ever order it. And the storage company is not the importer, they're the storage company. So who exactly is the importer? It's the German producer, because it's what's known as consignment stock. So the German producer, or Austrian or Italian or blah, 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 keep going, requires a GB EORI number. A GB VAT number is optional only if the goods are VATable. Don't need to have a company. It's a scheme called an ETP, non-established taxable person. Your agent in the UK has to act as an indirect representative if you're not established in the UK, because you're not established in the UK. And it's very, very similar to DDP, but with a fundamental change. DDP, delivered duty paid, is often a term dictated by a strong buyer. Is I want these goods DDP. Okay, says seller, because I want you to buy my goods. Consignment stock, the buyer is not being aggressive. He doesn't have a choice. At the time it crossed the frontier, the ultimate destination, the UK retailer, had not ordered the goods. They're going into store in UK and they might not ever order them. So the only person that can be the exporter is the person who's still got the ownership of the goods as they cross the frontier, the exporter. Now, we did a video on this ages ago, about 2 years ago, and it's still valid today. The link for it is there. It's on YouTube. And it's had about 5,000 views, and it deals with DDP and consignment stock. It's not a showstopper, but it is if you do nothing, because at the moment these sort of shipments have been going through Calais, Dover undeterred, but come GVMs, now the vehicle's heading towards Calais, that we require an import entry number from who exactly? It's not going to be the UK retailer, and it's not going to be the German smoked cheese producer unless he knows that's the process and has been an importer all this year. So think about this. This is where I think there's a big hole in the number of declarations that haven't yet been done. And we estimate about 40% of declarations that should be done haven't yet been done. I think consignment stock is a big contributor to that figure. Okay. Rules of origin. Oh, you got to love a rule of origin. Loads of confusion here, including me, I have to say. I got some of this wrong or misunderstood it. And again, thanks to the wonderful Sandra Strong of Strong and Heard. She's really helped us understand this process a bit better. And it's scary. So the next 3 slides, you might want to strap in for a minute and really pay attention just when you thought you were waning. So the TCA, the Trade Cooperation Agreement for GB imports, is nil duty for EU origin. So what do you need? Supplier's declaration, statement of origin, importer's knowledge. Importer's knowledge seems quite popular this year. Actually, you need 2 of the 3 above, never 1. You must have 2 of the 3 above. Lots of people have been working with just 1 of them. Here's why. The supplier declaration is the first step, and it is from the supplier to the exporter. They're not the same thing. So the supplier of the goods is the person supplying the exporter. They may be the same company, but the way to consider that is that the supplier would be the technical department of the company, and the exporter would be the sales department. So either way, the exporter has to give an origin statement, if this is relevant and applicable, that the goods are of EU preferential origin or are of French origin, Italian origin. They have to make that statement in order to qualify. And if the value of the goods, value of consignment is over €6,000, they have to be REX registered in order to make that statement. Under that value, they just make that statement on an invoice. Even with a REX number, they can make that statement on an invoice, but it must have their REX number on it as well. But they are not able to make that statement unless they have a supplier's declaration to give them the knowledge they require to make that statement. Now, if you think that through, that's pretty obvious, really, is that if I buy something from a guy down the road and then I export it, how do I know the origin? I don't really. I've got to get it from the supplier. Now, how many times do you roll back here? You can only really roll back 1. So the supplier's declaration and the origin statement or the exporter's declaration are different things, right? Because the exporter, bear in mind this could be the sales department rather than the technical department, doesn't know the production process, or is at origin statement level, he's not able to say what the production process is. He must have that information from either the supplier or his own internal technical or production department. Okay, let that absorb for a minute. Then the import declaration with the supplier's declaration to the exporter declaration on the invoice, or a statement of origin on the invoice, and assuming everything qualifies, then the importer is able to claim TCA preference based on the origin statement supplied by the exporter. The importer needs to be satisfied that the exporter holds the supplier declaration to enable them to issue the origin statement. Okay, it's not good enough just to have the origin statement. You've got to be comfortable and confident that the exporter has the supplier's declaration that enables him to make that statement. If it later transpires that the origin statement is not valid, either because the origin is wrong or because there is no supplier's declaration to support that origin statement, bearing in mind the supplier is your supplier's supplier, then the demand for post-clearance duty will be on the importer in GB or his agent if he's acted in an indirect representative basis. Scary, huh? That's why there's always two of three. Supplier's declaration, origin statement, import entry. That's one route. It was slightly confused by the government's advice saying that traders do not need suppliers' declarations for business in place at the time of, but don't get confused by that. It's been misconstrued. I kind of wish I hadn't even put it on there. Ignore that fact, because certainly from now on, this is the process, and it always has been, to be fair, but people didn't necessarily understand it. Again, big shout out to Sandra for this. So what's importer's knowledge? Well, importer's knowledge is actually just saying that number 2 is missing, that if you don't have the origin declaration or the origin statement from the exporter, then you're going to use the importer's knowledge to confirm the value, to confirm the origin. So if you don't have a statement of origin, you're going to use the importer's knowledge to confirm the origin. Still need the supplier declaration, because where the exporter requires the supplier declaration to be able to make the statement of origin, the importer's knowledge requires the supplier declaration to be able to equally make the statement of origin. Now, in order to do that, the importer requires the declaration from the supplier, which could be the exporter's supplier or the importer's supplier's supplier. You keeping up with this? Importer's knowledge is absolutely rare. It's been used everywhere, but it should be absolutely the exception. In order to have that declaration, the importer's knowledge should have the commodity code, the description of the production process, the origin of the components and ingredients used in that process, and if not wholly obtained in the EU, the commodity code and origin of each component stroke ingredient, the ex works value, what your supplier's paying, or weight of each component stroke ingredient. And then the origin is based on the percent of value weight, the percent of value or weight according to the different origins, and that changes by product. Okay, so I can't just say if it's 60% EU, it's EU, because there's different categories of that. And any details of any alterations, transformation. This is heavy. Okay, this importer's knowledge is just like, yeah, importer told me it was. Doesn't work like that. So when would you have importer's knowledge? Really, the only time you would have it would be almost like an intercompany movement where the buyer and seller are related, because how else can you get that level of information from the supplier? Okay. However, that then raises questions about the value, because there's an old C105A process that actually says, are the buyer and seller related? Yep, they are. That's why they use importer's knowledge. Has that relationship influenced the price? Yeah, probably, because it's intercompany. And if that's the case, it may have skewed the ad valorem origin rules based on the ex works value and the percentage from each country. Look, the number 1 rule is importer's knowledge should be the exception, not the rule. Get the exporter's declaration and make sure that the exporter has the supplier declaration to be able to issue the export declaration or the origin statement. Sorry, I'm confusing myself now. Okay, supplier's declaration, statement of origin, import entry, route 1. There's a link there below the big red box that is actually the government guidance. It can be a little bit confusing, but most of the documentation is in there, particularly around whether they qualify. Not the documentation flows, that's properly confusing, but the documentation flows we've shown here are correct. That link just gives you more information. So what we found this year is a lot of people who are customs agents, us included, we fall into this trap, who have been coding an entry, a chief entry, using U112 importer's knowledge and LIC99, which is a PNR get out of jail card. So you don't need half the codes you need. So just ask yourself, if you trained customs agent and you're using U112 and LIC99, how trained are you? Because it's about to get a lot tougher with CDS and with the, in fact, the CDS is even talking about putting a LIC99 equivalent in there at launch because the market isn't ready. This is a market I've been in since all my working life, and that's like saying I'm a customs agent, but I don't actually know how to do customs entries. It's really bad. So if you're seeing entries with U112, you've really got to ask yourself, is that the right thing? Yeah, I mean, honestly, an entry with U112 and LIC99 is proper diet version of an entry. Anyway, see. Let's just cover a couple more. We're nearly there, folks. We're nearly there. You've done well to hang on so far, an hour and a half in. There's new HS codes, just in case you didn't need a lot of any more pressure. There's new HS codes from 2022, from the 1st of January 2022. HS codes being the harmonized system, which is the 6-digit code. Okay. HS code is 6, export code is 8, import code is 10/14 if Mersing. So HS code, whenever you hear HS codes and you think, well, where's the rest of it? There's only 6. These are the worldwide 6-digit codes. They're the same, yeah, they're just extended. So it's the same 6 that becomes 8 that becomes 10. Yeah? Well, not so much on the 10 because that gets national extensions. Anyway, there's a major review every 5 years. Guess what, you lucky folks? It's this year. So things change, products change. Like we've shown a picture of vaping, which didn't exist 5 years ago, particularly. And I just thought people's cars in front of me were on fire. But yeah, vaping for example, that's not really well covered. Smartphones have gone to another level. And there's also potentially dual use connotations in there of military purposes. So in this wave, it's the largest in history. There's 351 amendments to the current tariff. You might want to check that your codes are still valid for 2022. There's a link there to the WCOtradetools.org, which is very good, but it's at HS code level, which is 6-digit. HMRC have provided us correlation tables to 8-digit, which of course is export, so it's still not really where we want to be, because most of the pressure is on imports. I mean, there's still pressure on exports on the commodity code for licensing requirements, but the duty rates attached to the export, attached to the com code for the import, there's more pressure on that one. So we're waiting for those. They are working on 10-digit correlation tables at the moment. There is a service called the Tariff Stop Press Notices, which you literally email tariff.management@hmrc.gov.uk. Links on the screen. To subscribe, and then you'll get as these things change. I mean, like, in about a year's time you'll regret ever subscribing because you get bombarded with stuff, but at the moment it's a bit of a hot subject because of the 1st of January changes, and therefore it's important to subscribe. So if you haven't done, get subscribing. Right, a few more slides to go. One of the things we wanted to confirm, and because we had this online and we were shy away from it on webinars and what have you, is let's shout from the rooftops what our prices are, because we publish them online anyway in our smart pack. So here one go, I'm going to shout from the rooftops. Keep it simple, stupid has always been our motto, hence the wavy line, and we just cut through the middle. Okay, so as much as possible, we just try and simplify everything. So our rack rate, our tariff rate on certain documents, particularly on GB imports, is as follows. IPAFFS is £20 per export health certificate, because generally speaking, each EHC requires an IPAFFS, although obviously there isn't an EHC at the moment, there is still an IPAFFS. So consider IPAFFS 20 quid. Simplified Frontier Declaration, £15 for a vehicle stroke container. An ENS Safety and Security Declaration, £15 per vehicle container. That doesn't start till July. And these rates include the GVMs production and inventory linking production, although not associated port costs, because they are variable. There are inventory linking port costs into Felixstowe, which are different than the ones into Southampton and so on and so forth. So we never include those, but it's all in the smart pack. Our subdeck is £35, which can be consolidated, as I say, into a 1 deck per day. There are possibilities of doing 1 deck per 10 days, but we need to be really confident on data for that one. We also don't charge for additional headings until you go over 10. And then what we do is, rather than say over 10, it's £2.50, because that's just invoice queries in the making. We actually say, well, look, if you go over 10, then we do each one in a block of 10. So it's £35 for up to 10 headings, £45 for up to 20, £55 for up to 30, and so on and so forth. So that otherwise you get this situation where I've done 11 headings and charge you £2.50 for each one over 3. And then you said, well, number 7's the same as number 5. And we say, no, that was a different preference. And anyway, we keep it nice and simple. It's in blocks. So if you're under 10 headings, you're at 35 quid a pop. We do talk about discounts if we can streamline things. So if we can get smooth data flows, and we work hard on that, we've got a good team on that, then we can always drive efficiencies and therefore drive savings. What we have to be careful with, and we get this quite a bit, is can you do all this fancy footwork in order to reduce the number of declarations? But that's actually incurring a cost. So we've got to be careful that we don't spend half a day consolidating the data so that we can do one declaration for 35 quid. So trust me, we'll have a conversation about that. The data has to come from the client, or if not, we will work with them to get, or work with you or them to get the data smooth. But for us, it's all about the data, not so much about the deck. Our smart pack is online in the download section. Do download it. It's very informative. It's got just about everything in a catch-all in it. And then I want to talk about CCC, the Customs Clearance Consortium, because this year is all about the truck. So there's about 28 members now of the consortium, but I wanted to just throw some very European ones in there. So there's Steph, who we're very proud to work with on refrigerated groupage and full loads. Steph is one of the largest logistics companies in Europe, whose turnover is in billions of euros. Geteka, based out in Lithuania, who's the largest haulier and transport company in Europe probably today. With the last time I looked was about 9,500 trucks, 18,000 drivers. Just let that soak in for a minute. Work with agro merchants on Ireland and Europe. Agro merchants now part of Americold, or soon rebranding as Americold. But again, a very well structured, busy, organized company that's kept us on our toes. Clipper, experts at last mile logistics and particularly reverse logistics on e-com, getting closer and closer to working with Clipper, because they were sitting on a process that really required them to do more on customs, and they recognized that and joined the consortium. And Lucas, I've got Lankowski. Not only have I got Lankowski's name in there, or Lucas's name in there, I've even got their logo. And Lucas they've been working very hard on the Silk Road, both rail and road to China, which seems to be the future. So if you are a logistics operator, should you become a CCC member? Why not? You get a dedicated team at our end, plug and play processes, and a white label portal version of our portal, and any tariffs and any literature we create. And you'll also be in the world of like-minded professionals. Prior to COVID, we were having regular meetings to all sit down and share our issues, because the members' rate schedule is the same, whether you're Steph, Geteka, or Joe Blogs as a member. The entry fee is the same, and the rates are the same, because we want everybody to be in a room and have a conversation without me worrying that you're going to go and talk to him and he's paying less. So there's none of that. There is a web address for it in our normal website of iori.uk. Look for the /consortium, and have a think about it, because it allows IORI to become the customs department of the logistics operator, and still gives the logistics operator margin to make that worthwhile. Okay. The other thing, and we're only 2 slides away now, so you've cracked it. The mantra which we use, created by Matt Jones, who's our finance director, and he's bang on really, is let's stop thinking about what we do here and what we do there. We just want to be a safe pair of hands. We want to be a safe pair of hands for our teams and our employees, so that they're looked after when they come to work and beyond. We want them to be a safe pair of hands for us, so that they're committed and respectful enough that if we give them certain jobs, they'll see it through, or shout on the top of their voice if they can't, and then we'll support them. And equally, our clients need to be a safe pair of hands in terms of the data we receive, because we act in good faith, and we need to be a safe pair of hands for them to actually process that data and live up to their expectations. So our absolute mantra is safe pair of hands at all levels. It sounds unsensational, but actually it's enormous, and we all strive to be in that position. So hopefully you've lasted 1 hour and 39 minutes, just crossing over to 40 minutes. You can look forward to 2022 with more information, if not necessarily more confidence necessarily, because I've unearthed some things you really need to worry about, but at least you've got more information. And that can never be a bad thing, because diagnosis being 50% of the cure and all that, then it's important to know the things about the rules of origin and so on and so forth. So with that, and with further ado, I'm going to just, because I don't know whether I've been hiding all time, but look at the t-shirt. You have to appreciate the t-shirt. I hope that's been useful for you. We've spent a long time putting these slides together because it's vital that you understand these pieces, because everyone's got into a kind of a lazy way of doing things. Imagine doing your driving test again today. Would you pass? I wouldn't. I'm a very good driver, but I wouldn't. The left hand, right hand feeding thing, So hopefully this has been useful. Watch this space. Do share this. This is why we've recorded it and pre-recorded it, because the more people that know about the GVMs process and the rules of origin particularly, then the better next year will go. So have fun, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.